If I'm sitting here wearing a hat in the Texas summer, it must be because we have a hat tutorial this week. This is a Fair Isle hat from Kraemer Yarns. I'm going to run through all the techniques used in this hat. This hat is designed by Judy Head. It is a very cute kind of either a leaf or a flower petal design, depending on what colors you pick. And it is a good, I would say this is a good first Fair Isle hat if you've never knit Fair Isle before, mainly because the little bursts of color are short and we're not having to wrap and carry the floats on the back of the work. Don't worry if that doesn't make sense to you. If you are experienced with Fair Isle, you'll be happy to know that this knits up pretty easily without long floats in the back to have to catch. Let me go ahead and take this off so we can look at it. It is a very cute design. It is made in Kraemer Yarn Perfection Worsted, which is a really easy care yarn that knits up just like wool. It is a merino wool blend, and I know that I talk about Perfection Worsted, DK, Sport. I love this yarn because it's really easy for me to use this in tutorials because I know that it's easy care. They have over 70 colors, and it also is a really good value. It's a really good price on yarn. So I love using it. And another good thing about Easy Care yarn is that if you make this hat as a gift for someone, you don't have to send them a bunch of instructions on how to care for it, right? They can just wash it and dry it. Washing machine, dryer, whatever they want to do, or they can treat it very gently and use really nice wool soap like I did. It smells really good. Anyway, I have a few different color combinations to show you. Depending on how you knit it up and the colors you pick, it ends up looking really different, and we'll take a close-up look at those in the tutorial. But like I said, there are over 70 colors, and you'll want to pick 1, 2, 3, 4 colors for the hat. And in the next section, I'll talk about kind of some good guidelines for picking colors. I am not an expert on picking colors, but I did okay this time. This one is the same as the pattern photo. Actually, let's go ahead and cut away to that picture, because I kind of forgot to do that because I was wearing the hat. You see how it looks on someone who has a lot of hair? I think hats, maybe because I don't ever have a lot of hair, I always think hats look better on someone with, you know, a lot of hair coming out the bottom of it. Okay, anyway, if you would like to get your pattern to follow along and take a look at the 70 different yarn colors, you can click the little eye in the upper right-hand corner to take a look. I'll have all the links there on my website, or if you're on a mobile device, you can look at the video description field below, and I'll have a link to the Kraemer Yarns website for the pattern and for Perfection Worsted yarn. And next up, we're going to take a look at the different colors I have here for kind of a guideline on how to pick your colors, and we'll get started with the cast on. Okay, if you are watching this section to help with some guidelines for picking your colors, great. We're also going to dive into the cast on and joining it around and getting started with chart reading. So let's go ahead and take a look. Okay, the first thing I want to show you are some of the different color combinations I have here, and I will list out these different colors in the video description field and on my website, the exact colors. This one is the color from the pattern photo, and it is I kind of thought about these leaves, these petals, as, well, either petals or leaves, right? And this one, because they're green, they're kind of leaves with this eggplant colored background. And then this next sample, I did kind of more earthy colors, kind of keeping them as leaves. I really like this one. And this one, I didn't make the greatest color choices on this one because I wanted to make these more like petals than leaves, but I should have chosen a darker pink color because it's too close to the white. I mean, it's still a pretty hat, I still like it, but I like the look of the petals really showing up, and I just didn't get that in this sample. But still a good hat, still fun to knit. So it wasn't really, it didn't break my heart. Let's just put it that way. Let me get these out of the way because we are going to get started. Well, let's get started with the cast on first. I am going to, for the most part, show all of this on 16-inch circulars, and I put out a video last week on knitting Fair Isle using magic loop, meaning using a long 32-inch circular instead of 16-inch circulars. And I'll tell you right now, it is easier to use 16-inch circulars. If you don't have an interchangeable set of 16-inch circulars, put that on your wish list for the next birthday or whatever holiday you have coming up, because you will certainly enjoy knitting hats more with that, with shorter needles. So we do have a bunch of stitches to cast on for this, and I'm going to use the long tail cast on, a knitted cast on or a long tail cast on, or either one is fine. And I'm going to give you just a quick rundown on how to cast on, how to know you have enough tail to cast on a lot of stitches. You leave yourself a 6-inch tail and then start winding the yarn around the needle that you're going to use. And count, of course, because each wind around the needle is enough to cast on one stitch. So if you wind enough of, you wind a third of the number or half the number that you need to cast on, you just mark that spot and then, double or triple or quadruple that amount and make your slip knot right there, and you have enough yarn for the long tail cast on, because heaven knows we've all cast on a bunch of stitches for something to get close to the end and realize that we didn't have enough, or we have that panic situation where we're playing yarn chicken the last few minutes because we don't know if we have enough. Now the next thing I want to demonstrate is, because this is a lot of stitches on the needle, I have so many samples here, I'm trying to keep things untangled. Because we have so many stitches on the needle, we need to pay close attention to making sure that when we're joining in the round, that we don't have the stitches twisted. And so a tabletop is good for this. Line up all the knots from your cast on in the inside of kind of the circle that your cord is making. Line all those up. And it's tough because if you're using 16-inch circulars, the stitches are pretty tight on there. I mean, not really, but they're not stretched out for sure. Okay, so you've got your working yarn over here on the left needle. Get your stitch marker on that needle, and then very carefully start knitting. Okay, and then go back and check to make sure that you didn't have like a lapse of consciousness and everything got twisted again. It looks good. Now, I just went through how to get that perfect. Truth be told, if you get one round done and realize that you made a mistake, it's not too late. You can straighten it out after one round. After 2 rounds, you have too much fabric going to straighten it out, to untwist it. So make sure that you check again when you get to the end of the first round. That's just a little trick. Doesn't have any, that'll get you through like every time you have to join in the round, especially on 16-inch circulars when things are getting tight. Now the next thing I want to demonstrate is, because so many of us are using Knit Companion, I will run through getting a chart set up in Knit Companion, because this is the chart we're going to use. And it's just, I know that Knit Companion is a big piece of software, but it's so easy to set up charts, and I'm going to demonstrate here on the iPad. To do that, and this is available for Setup and Essentials tier. I'm going to go to Setup, and I do this all the time now because charts are so easy. Tap the plus, add a chart piece, select the page the chart is on, and then now the arrow pointing down is telling me to highlight the chart. Just kind of do it a rough highlight, and now I'm going to, oops, why can't I find the edge there? There we go. Now I'm going to clean it up a little bit. I'm having a hard time with that bottom one. And I hit the magic wand button here. And it got it just right. So I'll tap the crop button. Whoops. Okay. And it got it just right. So now my one-tap markers will work. I can go to knit. I have this separate page that my chart is on. And when I tap the counter up here, the highlighted row changes. And then of course in Knit Companion, you have the option of changing this highlighter bar color. In a color chart, you have to pay close attention. Like if you look at the number out here, it's easy to see what's highlighted, but it can be confusing with that. Okay, I just wanted to point that out. And now following the chart, we can talk about following the chart. Because we're knitting in the round, we're always going to work from right to left. We're always going to read each row from right to left. It's only when you're working a chart, when you're knitting a piece flat, that you read right to left, left to right, right to left, left to right. We're always going to be reading this way. So that's an easy thing to keep track of. And then beyond that, we have just straight stockinette. There are no other stitches in the chart. It's just a color chart to follow. And that's pretty fun. Okay, so we're going to get started here with this, this design right here. And if you're new to Fair Isle, I think this pattern is nice because it starts you off gently with a pretty easy Fair Isle pattern to follow. And what was I going to say before we... Okay, I do want to mention this. You see these black boxes here next to the petal pattern? Those are no stitches. Totally ignore that. The first part of the pattern is, the Fair Isle chart is this many stitches, and the second part is this many stitches. It all works out. Just trust me, just ignore that part, because I know that gets confusing for people. Okay, I'm going to move the iPad out of the way and pull up my chart, one of my 8 million samples here, because I'm here at the beginning of my round and ready to get started with the Fair Isle pattern. Make sure I have my stitch marker there. And why don't we use light blue for the second color? My goodness, what a mess of yarn. And the samples are getting tangled with each other, which of course doesn't help, right? Okay, so I start with on row 1 with 2 dark blues. And now I'm going to add the second color. And to do that, I take my yarn, I leave myself about a 6-inch tail to weave in, and I just knit my 2 stitches with the new yarn. Now you have these ends here, or you have a working yarn and an end. You have the option of just leaving it and weaving in the ends later. I like to tie a knot with everything on the needle, so I can't over tighten it with the stitches on the needle. Tie a double knot. This knot will probably come loose while you're working on the hat. You can tighten it up before you weave the ends in. It's a tidy little knot, and I promise it will not cause any problems with your work. I always tie my yarn ends together. Okay. I have a bunch of videos on how to manage 2 working yarns, right? How to manage 2 working yarns in Fair Isle. And I can find those videos and link to them because they go into more detail about my favorite Fair Isle techniques. I like to hold, because I'm a flicker who uses my right hand for the working yarn, I like to hold both strands in my right hand. And you always want to keep kind of one over the top of the other one. That's important for yarn dominance. And I believe the yarn that's on the bottom is the one that ends up being the more dominant looking one in the finished fabric. But kind of like my rule of thumb that I always go with, so I'm always consistent, is I always keep the lighter color on top and the darker color on bottom. And it doesn't matter, you can manage the 2 working yarns however you like. This is just how I do it. I put my 2 fingers between, and I kind of have one on my index finger and one on my No, I guess they're both on my index finger. But I'm just going to keep alternating. And if I want to stress that however you end up managing these working yarns is fine. I know before I became a flicker, I would knit 2, drop that working yarn, pick up the other one. That works too. Okay, the most important thing, once you get your yarn managed, the most important thing is to make sure that we're not bunching these stitches up like crazy, that we're keeping loose floats. These bits of yarn on the back of the work, those are floats. We want to make sure they're loose, otherwise the stitches are just going to be tight and scrunched together and angry. So to manage the floats, I put the needle in and then pull on the stitches on the right needle. I'll show you this again. Then knit my 2 stitches. And when I change color, I put my needle in, I pull the stitches on the right needle to separate them. And that's going to make this working yarn that I'm going to use next travel a further distance to make that stitch, which is going to be plenty of yarn in the float to keep it from bunching. I can hear dogs doing something. Probably not good. I can't see them from here with all the lights on me. Okay, you see, it's just automatic for me to knit my 2 stitches, put the needle in, stretch out the stitches on the right needle to knit the next 2 stitches. Okay, work that all the way around, go to the next row, which is actually a solid row, and then we alternate the 2 colors on the following row. Let me see my list here. Yeah, this is all I needed to show you in this, because you can finish up this section, and in the next section we're going to talk about getting started with or working the petal pattern and finishing the hat. Fair Isle hats are so much fun because you can use up little bits of yarn if you have them, or you know, buy the exact colors that you want to put together in a hat. And I like the idea of Fair Isle hats in tutorials because people who might be intimidated to take on a whole Fair Isle sweater, this is just a little bit of knitting. You're going to be through this Fair Isle part before you know it. You're going to be wanting to knit a second hat, I promise. Okay, that's it for this one here. Okay, so you're well on your way now. Next up, we're going to talk about the Fair Isle part when we're actually into the petals or the leaves, whatever you want to call them, and finishing the hat. Okay, we are well on our way. You are almost an expert in Fair Isle knitting. I just want to make sure it's really clear. We get into the next part, which is same thing, just a little bit different. Let's take a look. Okay, if you have gotten up through the first little bit of Fair Isle that's easing you into more Fair Isle, we can start talking about the petal pattern or the leaf pattern, however you want to, whatever you want to call it, whatever your colors dictate. Now, when we're working this, we can, after we finish this section here, you can break this yarn because you're not going to use it again until much further along in the hat. And then you're going to attach the next colors the same way you did when we attached this color, leaving yourself a 6-inch tail. And on the inside of the work, I've already woven in the ends here, but you will have these ends to weave in. And you can see my tidy little knots here when I tied the ends together when I switched yarn. And aside from this row here, you only attach 2 colors, and then this row here you have 1 color that just shows up in 1 row. Okay, and I have everything on magic loop this time. I did release a video last week on knitting Fair Isle on a long circular and not a 6-inch circular. So I will link to that video. Well, I'll give you, if you're not on a mobile device, you can click the little I in the upper right-hand corner to see that video. I'll also put it in the video description field. Okay. I don't like knitting Fair Isle on Magic Loop, but I'll go ahead and demonstrate it. And the numbers are different. Something that's, down here it was just 2 and 2 and 2 and 2. So we have to read the chart a little more carefully. And if you like, you can put a stitch marker between each pattern repeat, because we're just going to keep repeating the same thing around and around the whole hat. But that's up to you. I did not use stitch markers. Put my needle in and get my yarns twisted around each other to catch. And this time I have 1, 2, 1, 1, 2, 3, stretch those stitches out, 1, 1, 2, 3. And this is awkward with Magic Loop, man. I have the deepest respect for people who knit on Magic Loop all the time. 2. Okay, that was a pattern repeat. Looks pretty good. Check my Magic Loop here at the beginning of the round. And so that's one repeat. That's one bit of the chart worked. I'm just going to keep working that all the way around, of course. Can put a stitch marker here if it helps you keep track, but it is no different than what we were doing down here. The only difference in the actual work, the only difference is that we have to pay closer attention to the chart and to the color changes that we're making, right? I think that's clear. I'm sure it's clear because that's the only way the pattern can come out, right? Okay. Now I can't find one of my samples. Seriously, where's one of my, oh, there it is, okay, okay. Once you finish the Fair Isle, you go back to the main color, and then we get these beautiful crown decreases at the top of the hat. I love it. I love the way knitting does this. And this is just a matter of following the row by row instructions, the round by round instructions, and you'll get this beautiful spiral at the top of the hat. At some point, your 16-inch circulars are going to be too long to keep going. So you're going to have to switch to double pointed needles, or if you're on Magic Loop, you could keep going until you're down to the last few stitches. I stuck with the 16-inch circulars until round 60, if that helps you. And then I switched to DPN because they were just too few stitches to fit around on the double pointed needles. There's one more thing. Let me make sure I'm getting all of this. Yep. One more thing I want to show you that does cause some confusion. I guess I should mention also to switch to DPNs from my circular needles, all I did was put a DPN in my right hand and start knitting. And I knit 1/3 of the stitches on the first one, 1/3 of the stitches on the second one, 1/3 of the stitches on the third one. By the time I got there, all of my stitches were on DPNs and I could put my 16-inch circulars away. Okay, this last little bit, there is a cool technique for getting, you break the yarn when you're completely finished, you're down to the last few stitches, and it's not really a cool technique, it's just a way of making this as tidy as possible. I'm going to thread that yarn onto a tapestry needle, and then in the same direction that I'm knitting, this is how I'm going to finish off the hat, this is the very end of it. I have the yarn end on my tapestry needle, I'm going to go the same direction of the knitting, and I pull the stitches down to part of the taper of the needle so I have a little bit more room for my tapestry needle. Same direction as the knitting, pull it down to the taper. We're almost done. Okay, now that we've got that on there, you pull, and that's how you get the very tidy top of the hat. Now, as long as I've got it threaded on the tapestry needle, I might as well go ahead and take care of this end. Poke it into the hat. And this is something that I do, especially when I'm weaving in cotton ends, but it's good for something like this because just weaving in the end, this, you know, pulling that tightly and having a little tiny hole at the top of the hat is important. You don't want that to come loose. And so my technique for this is to separate the yarn plies. And this is a 3-ply yarn. So it's going to be 2 and 1. Thread 2 of those plies back on the needle and just move them half a stitch away, just to another loop so they're not, so the 1 ply and the 2 plies aren't coming out of the same place. Now pull on the whole thing, all of the strands, to make sure that stayed tight, and tie the 1 ply and the 2 plies together. I'm actually going to tie a triple knot because I do not want that to go anywhere. Okay, once you do that, you can weave those ends in if you like. You can weave them in together. I'm just going to cut them because I'm confident that those aren't going to come undone. And then there is the beautiful top of my hat, my finished hat. I can take the clipping marker out. You know what? There's something that I forgot to mention. Something I forgot to mention right up front that I will mention now. There's one tiny modification that I made to some of these hats. You see we just have a rolled brim here. On round 6, I purled around on a couple of my samples. And that purled round keeps it from curling. It stops the curl at that point. So, I mean, this is doing fine and it looks good. There's nothing wrong with doing it that way. But if you're looking at my hats and you're seeing that I have this extra purl round, it might be easier to see on this one. This extra purl round, that's just a technique you can use when you have a rolled brim or rolled cuffs on sleeves, or anytime the work is meant to roll a little bit, you can kind of have a stopper for the rolling just by purling 1 round. And that was round 6 when I did that. Okay, it wasn't on my list to talk about that, and I stick to my list so much. Anyway, here's the whole hat finished. So pretty. I love this pattern. I want to knit 10 more. And that's it. Once you're finished with that, you can weave in the ends and wash, block, however you're going to do the hat. The hat really doesn't require a lot of anything. If you are seeing a little bit of tension around the Fair Isle, yeah, well, it happens, especially if you're new with Fair Isle. Washing it is really going to help even all of that out. You can also do what I always do, which is put the hat on your fist and go around and around like this, and that's going to help even out the part of the hat with the Fair Isle on it, which is going to help. But like I said, it's easy care. You can put this in the washer and the dryer. I usually just put it in the dryer for a little while and then let it air dry kind of the last 30% or so. You know, you're not going to ruin it by putting it in the dryer. That is it. Many thanks to Kraemer Yarns for sponsoring this tutorial. Again, if you'd like to get your pattern, your yarn, everything else, you can click the little eye in the upper right-hand corner to go to my website where I'll have all the links. Or if you're on a mobile device, you can look in the video description field below for those links. I hope you enjoy knitting this hat. I love Fair Isle hats so much. I can't wait to finish all of these. Good luck.